Hello and welcome back to the Real Estate Roundup podcast. And in today's episode, we're going to be sharing with you guys some very interesting tips on what is negotiable in a real estate transaction and actually how you can get the best bang for your buck and actually negotiate the best deal for your specific situation. My name is Kobe Zinn and I am joined here today by Tony Flores, who is a great real estate professional in the state of Texas. And he's going to be sharing with us some of his top tips on negotiations in a real estate transaction and how he's helping his clients both on the buy side and on the sell side on what are some of the things he's helping them negotiate as well. But Tony, hope you're doing well. How is everything going for you in this past week here?
Going great, going great. So yeah, we're jumping into October, so I wanted to bring on a Halloween themed shirt today and let you know that negotiations cannot and should not be scary.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're gonna be sharing some of the top tips to make negotiations not so scary, right here in October.
That's
And
right.
I'm loving this new shirt, this new jersey that you have going on. And so stay tuned, guys, because Tony's got a little bit more in the bag here for some of the other holidays coming up as well, so you guys can see that. But let's just start out right. And Tony, if you want to maybe share with everybody a little bit on negotiations in real estate and just kind of cover more of a broad sense of what are some of the things that are negotiable, because I think people think probably there's less to be negotiated than there actually is. And in reality, there's more things that you can actually negotiate in a real estate transaction.
All right, cool. Thanks for that. Thanks, Kobe. So let's just kind of start with the broader picture. Okay, what is real estate? Real estate, by simple terms, would be, land, a building, and the property that goes is attached to that. So, for instance, and here's an example you can use. So, part of real estate is what's attached to the walls. So, think about if your house, for instance, was a ship and it was rocking back and forth. Anything that's swaying that's going to fall over, salt and pepper shakers, things like that. That would be non-realty items. Okay. So things that are attached would be like a microwave mounted on the wall, a microwave sitting on the counter is personal property, things like that. Okay. A plant, for instance, if you have a plant in a pot, uh, beautiful plant, beautiful pot, could be outside the house, could be inside the house. That is considered personal property. If it's planted in the ground, that's actually part of the real estate. Okay, so that's one thing. So when a house is going to market to sell, the light fixtures, the things that are already installed in the house, those are all real estate. Can they be negotiated? Can something be negotiated if it's not part of the real estate? Sure. Lots of times refrigerators are negotiated. Washer and dryers can be negotiated in the deal. And this could be something that the seller intended to take with them, but maybe they just thought it looked really right in that area and they just wanted to ask for something like that. The buyers wanted to ask for something like that. Believe it or not, interest rates are negotiable. How can you get interest rates negotiated? Well, instead of offering, $5,000 or $8,000 less for the house, you can ask for $5,000 or $8,000 to be applied towards your interest rate, and that's what's called an interest rate buy down. So there's been a lot of talk about interest rates. Interest rates are negotiable. They can be bought down at a lower rate. Essentially what you're doing is you're prepaying interest up on the front end, but you're benefiting because you're going to save a lot more money on over the life of the loan and on the back end. So, and again, interest rates can be refinanced later on as we anticipate they would be dropping. You'll have to see, where the cost breakdown works out for you. But yes, interest rates are one of those things that can be negotiated.
Yeah, so that's pretty interesting. A lot of people don't know that interest rates can be negotiated, right? They think things are just fixed, and they have to kind of stick with whatever rate that is on the market or being told to them. But
Mm.
like we were just talking about, different things can be negotiated in a real estate transaction that a lot of people might not know about. So,
Yeah.
what are
Another,
some of your top tips, you would say, as far as being able to negotiate a better deal for both people on the buying side, but also on the selling side as well?
all right. So, top tips for negotiating is just kind of know where you're at in the market. Okay. If you're a seller and your house is one in a sea of many houses that have similar features or would have a similar benefit to the consumer, and it doesn't really stand out, it's probably best to be able to work on negotiating and being more flexible, as opposed to you really have a, a prime, for instance, a prime location, or you have maybe amenities that other houses in that area in a similar price point don't have, like a pool or like a beautiful view. I mean, you'll be in a better position in those cases. So, and as a buyer, also, what are you being able to look for? Some sellers going to be less flexible. Some sellers are going to be more flexible. It depends a lot of times on motivation. At the end of the day, the the one who cares the least is generally the one who is going to win in the negotiation. So if a seller's very motivated to sell and the buyer's asking for more things, and the buyer could be, we could be going to from one builder to the next. Builders are flexible on things like, in some cases, believe it or not, a lot of times the window blinds can be negotiated. There's appliance packages that can be negotiated. There's, of course, interest rates buy downs that can be worked as well. A lot of times, what the builders do, when there's been a drop in interest rates, they'll push some money to lower the interest rates. That's why you see, in some cases, they will be offering special interest rates on, ready to move in homes, and they'll have a certain dollar amount that they've already prepaid up front. They say we'll have, you know X million dollars of loans that we can use for this interest rates. Once that amount has been depleted, now they can't they can either no longer offer that interest rate, or they have to go back and rebuy those interest rates down as well. So, just, my knowledge of talking to different builders and communicating with them, being on the phone, getting email updates, asking for email updates as well. I get tons of text messages with the builders saying what they're offering for these interest rates or these neighborhoods and things like that. So it's a constant cycle of things, that can be, that we can really take advantage as a buyer. And as a seller, the other thing, there's so many things that can be negotiated. A lot of times the sellers are being asked to do they could be asking to do concessions towards the buyer's initial down payment. So instead of them having to come up with 3.5%, maybe they'll do a seller concession of 3.5%, so that the buyers don't have to come up with necessarily 3.5% of down payment money. They just pay closing costs and things like that. So really, at the end of the day, there's so many things that it's negotiable. Really, almost anything can be negotiated.
Right. Like in a real estate transaction, pretty much anything can be negotiated as far as, the actual terms, right? And a lot of people probably don't know that. And that's why I think it's very important for us to talk about some of these things, because you want to go into a transaction understanding that you have these options, whether if you're a buyer or a seller, because once you do, like you said in the beginning of this episode, things can be a little less scary,
Mhm.
right? Going into these transactions. And I love what you said there about, kind of whoever has more options has more room to negotiate, right? If you're a seller who's really motivated to sell, but you don't have that many options as far as buyers coming to you, then you
Mhm.
probably have less room to negotiate. And the same thing for the buyers, right? If you're really fixated on one specific home and that's the one home that you're only making an offer on, and this is the only home that you want to buy, then there's probably less room for you to negotiate as well. But in those instances, right, is there still things that can be negotiated? Is there still things that you can do to kind of get the deal where it's not necessarily getting it in your favor, but just making sure that you're getting a better deal and you're moving forward in the transaction where you're getting things that you actually work for you in that transaction, even if you have potentially limited options.
Right. Yeah. So for sure, there's plenty of plenty of things that can be negotiated. For example, I had a buyer that he was interested in a house. He wanted to offer the full ask on it. He was not open. He was not, you know, he was fine with the way the house was, the way it was priced, and he was motivated to buy it because it had a additional dwelling unit. So that worked for him, right? There weren't a whole lot out there. Again, it kind of goes back to what's kind of your competition within that market. Now, that house wasn't in great shape and it was a little bit older. I was able to negotiate after we had contracted. I was able to negotiate the concession of $20,000 for the septic to because the septic was at the end of its life cycle. It was essentially on its last leg. It was functioning, but not necessarily in great condition. So um, things like that. The things you always want to make sure that you are getting in your negotiation is that things like the septic system, of course, is super important, but things also related to safety. Are there electrical hazards or anything, things like that that could potentially have an issue with your family, your being in that property? So those are always the things. It's almost like you don't want to not negotiate those things and those concessions, of course, as the seller should be understanding. Hey, so if you can be putting those people potentially at risk, you got to be careful about that, right? You don't ignore those types of things. So you certainly want to take care of those and make everyone happy.
And that's the part of negotiation I think people want to understand as well. It's not, necessarily winning or losing, but, we can probably talk a little bit on this later. How can we make the other party feel like they're gaining something, right? And we've talked about
Right.
this a little bit as well, but it's not necessarily about winning or losing. It's about, how both parties can just move forward and be comfortable with the situation and how the transaction is turning out, right? Maybe the seller's giving up some concessions that for them is really important, but for the
Hmm.
buyers is they're giving up something that for them it's not so important as well. So it's just figuring out what matters most, what's motivating each party to kind of make their decisions, and how that they can move forward the best, right? So you
Yeah.
can maybe talk a little bit, Tony, on you know how is it possible for the other party to feel like they're getting something in the transaction, even for both parties to feel like they're gaining something in the transaction, so that way they can come to the closing table and be comfortable, and each party's giving up a little bit, but they both feel like at the end of the day they're very happy with the decision and they quote unquote won the transaction.
Right. Yeah, it is important, of course, in negotiation, not to have one side feel like you know, they just got beaten up by the whole transaction. So there's lots of ways. There's lots of ways to do that. Of course, you know, per, continually asking after concessions are made, and then asking for another one after concessions made, and just kind of keep pushing and pushing. It doesn't give a good feeling for those other parties. So just know when you've won enough. In some cases, where again, you're just asking for things to be to try to continually push and continue to win. The main thing is, are you doing this because it's needed or necessary, or is it something that's going to maybe make you feel better or feed an ego? Like, I don't want to, I don't, I don't want to go into something feeling like, hey, this person's probably just asking for this because their ego. For instance, a broker was asking me about the seller's asking price. I said, yeah, and they said, well, do you have any other offers? And my response was like, well, we don't have any at this time, but based on the market, is a very fair offer for the square footage and for the location. Well, he came back in the lower price, and he said, well, why aren't they taking it? They don't have any other offers. I said, well, is it based on them not having other offers, or is it based on what the actual value of the house is? So he was just trying to show that he was winning for his client by trying to be a tough negotiator. But what ended up happening for him is their client, they already told me that they were in love with that house. The client ended up losing the house because someone else made a better offer. So when you try to play hardball, and you're supposed to be doing things for the best interest of your client. If the client was happy with the house, and he's just saying, well, let's see if they don't have any other offers, let's push this one out to them and try to get the best deal. Well, guess what? You can't get the best deal if it's not accepted, right? So it wasn't accepted, and we ended up moving forward with another buyer who, equally loved the property, and they did also feel like that the price was justified. We got that under contract, got it sold, and the other people left without the house that they said that they really loved. So, again, are you pushing? Are you pushing because it's going to make you feel better, or are you pushing because this is what your client needs? So that's really kind of question. Ego is in the word negotiation, but it shouldn't be there. So I take the ego out of the negotiation.
Right. And that's the best way to think to approach negotiations, right? Because once your ego is involved, you find yourself in situations where you're just trying to, I guess, win, and
Right.
you're losing out on what you actually wanted, which is the deal closing and actually
Yeah.
moving forward. So, that's a great tip, because a lot of times we feel like we should push harder, we should go into a negotiation trying to, not necessarily review everything and to be, very tough in a sense in that negotiation. But sometimes it doesn't work out that way, right? Sometimes maybe you come on too strong and the other side figures that out, or for them it's not, they have more options, right? Like we were just talking about, there's more
Right.
offers coming in,
Yeah.
and
And
they don't
sometimes
necessarily
it's
have to
just
take that deal.
yeah, sometimes it's just 3 or 4 days down the road. And if that was a great option for my client, she would have moved forward with it. But it wasn't a great option for her. They were asking for uh I think about $13,000 off the price, and they were also asking for closing costs and all kinds of other things. So it was like, and this person, I can tell he had a big personality and was very competitive, and that works for a lot of people, and that's fine, and it probably worked great. I'm sure he's successful in a lot of things that he does, but in this instance, it didn't help his client, which again, you know, he kind of stepped in on negotiations, by the way, because his agent wasn't able to make this deal happen. So he wanted to step in and show, kind of introduce himself into the whole thing and say, this should happen. We should be putting this together. Let's just get it contracted, all this kind of stuff. But he's working for his client, and I'm working for my client, and we've got to, we weren't meeting in the middle, and you know, the agent had already told me that the clients love the house, and so why didn't they get it? Well, maybe it's because he wanted to win.
Yeah. So make sure to keep that in mind. And, with situations like that that could come up, do you go through like a process as far as the conversations you have with your potential clients before going into, let's just say, making an offer or negotiation process, just so that you have a better understanding of maybe what they're comfortable with as far as what they're comfortable sacrificing, but also what is it that they absolutely need? Do you go through that process with both your buyer and seller clients?
Yes, yeah. So for my sellers, I want to bring the whole picture out to them. Okay, let's take a look at what's existing on the market right now. What is our competition? Because we have to look at everything else besides your house. We got to look at all the other houses in this same price zone in this same area, because when someone's going to be looking at your house, they're going to be looking at those other houses. So how does your house compare to them? And in some cases, I had a client that was interested in selling their house, and they were interested in selling in their house about $40,000 above where I had um, done my analysis on it. So my my thing is like, I'm not here to argue with them. I'm here to help them, right? So what I decided to do is like, okay, you feel like that's a fair price for your house because you've done things to it, you've put money in it, things like that. Okay, you have a pool. Okay, all right. So what we're going to do is, what do you think about this? Let's take a look at the other houses that are right in that price range that you want to list at, and let's take a look at them. So we get permission to go look at those houses. We make appointments, we view them, and we say, okay, and then we viewed 3 houses just in like literally the same, probably 10th of a mile. We got back to their house and I said, okay, you know, how do you feel about that price? Well, those houses they agreed look nicer, and they said, okay, well, let's talk about, what do you think the price should be? So then I got to the point where like, well, I feel like this is going to be the fair price. It's going to be bring more people to your house, and you're going to be able to show better because they're not going to be comparing it to those other houses because they're going to buy those houses. This is going to stay here. So this is a way to kind of prep. So I'm pre-negotiating the price in order to be fair for the market, but also to help them out, because if they just price it wrong and it stays on the market, it doesn't benefit them because it looks like, it's going to be like something in the back of a grocery store. This is the merchandise that people don't want. This is kind of the overages, the things that people have passed on. Okay, so you don't want to be that house on the market. You want to show it in its best light. You want it to be priced right, and you want to show well. The other thing is on for buyers. If I'm okay, yeah. So let's stick with the seller. So with the sellers, so if we get an offer and then of course they're going to do their inspections, I'll ask the agent, hey, what has been your discussion with your buyers on the inspection report? Are they going to be nitpicking? Are they going to be realistic with, okay, what's fair to get resolved and what might? So that's a good thing to do as well, because you want to understand what the other agent is communicating to them. And if they're saying, hey, really haven't talked about the inspection reports. Well, in some cases, an experienced home buyer is going to understand there's going to be things, if they've had a house for any period of time, they know, hey, there might be a light switch or something that kind of flickers, but it still works, or it's you know maybe it needs to be replaced and they haven't replaced it, so maybe they would get address it. So they're going to know that things go wrong with the existing homes, and things like that. Prepping the sellers, prepping the other agents, and asking if they've had those conversations. That way, it'll soften the blow. Like if your seller is getting a report and like they're asking for everything on the whole list to be fixed, when it could be. I had one instance where the temperature between the bathtub spout and the kitchen temperature, they were off by 5 degrees, and for some reason the buyer wanted them to match. They wanted those degrees to match. It's funny, like, why? So I asked the agent, why is this really something that's super important to them? Yeah, they don't understand why it doesn't match. Well, by 5 degrees, they're both of the temperature were safe, right? But that agent probably didn't do a good job of prepping them what some of the expectations would be for a realistic inspection, and what's reasonable to get fixed. So believe it or not, we had to make some adjustments to make them happy and to get the deal done. But at the end of the day, what are we going to say? Oh, we're not going to sell it because it's because you're not going to agree to have a 5 degree difference in one spout to the next. No, we did it, but it should have never even been an issue. It was just one of those things that stood out to me for it stood out for. And what's funny is I've driven past that house more recently, probably in the last 6 months, and the house was in great shape when it was sold. It does not look good on the outside. So as picky as they were at buying, and they weren't there, doesn't seem to be taking care of that property too well.
Yeah. So that's I think that's actually a pretty good example of like what people are willing to give up and what they're not willing to give up. So for some people, right, they care about one thing, but once they're in the house, it's a completely different story. But I think for that situation, right, and your situation for the sellers, right, they probably for them it made more sense to just deal with that issue than it is to not deal with it and then potentially go find another buyer
Right.
right at that point in the transaction.
Yeah, I mean, we're under contract. When you're under contract, you really don't want to go back to market. That's the thing, because now you're showing on the MLS BOM, which means back on market. Like, then people are going to ask, "Hey, you were under contract," so you get calls from other agents. I see you're under contract. Like, what happened? You don't want it to be your seller's fault. You don't want it to be a fault of the property, right? Well, then the other people saw the inspection report and they decided not to buy. That's not a good response to say. So we do have to keep things confidential with our sellers, and so we don't want to divulge anything that would potentially hurt them. A lot of times in negotiations, you can ask a lot of questions, and the other side might give up stuff that they probably shouldn't. So that will also help you as well. Little tip there.
Yeah. So that's yeah. I mean, if you're asking the right questions in negotiations, right? If you just kind of come from a situation like a position of, hey, I'm curious about what's going on, right,
Right.
and having those conversations, it's more than likely the other side is just going to start talking, and then you never know what kind of information might come up that could be beneficial or important as well. So, I think you share some great tips, Tony, on negotiations and what people should be looking out for, what they should be preparing for when they go into negotiations. But also, I think it's important to position your property, right, if you're a seller or as a buyer as well, to understand before even going into negotiations, what are some of the things you need to do, right? Like the tip you shared about positioning your property not as something that's going to stay on the market for a long time, because it opens up more room for potential buyers to go in and use that as a negotiating point in their leverage as well. So before we wrap up today, do you have any last tips or any last advice for people out there looking to be in the market on negotiations and some of the things that we haven't really talked about here in today's episode yet?
The main thing is, yeah, don't assume that something can't be asked for. See some investment properties, and the funny thing is, the best thing about that house was that there was a chandelier in the dining room. There was like a stained glass chandelier. And the funny thing about that listing is, of all the things that were wrong with that, that was the only thing that looked nice. And in the listing, it was actually the only thing that they wanted to retain from the house. So, and that house had been on the market a long time, of course. If they didn't want, in this case, they should have just pulled that out and replaced it with a regular one. But I think the only tip is, a realtor can actually get a lot of information that can benefit you in the negotiation through a lot of different means. A lot of times, it'll happen through just general conversations with the agents. What's going on with the house or things like that? Tell me about this. Just having good conversations with people, we can actually extract good information that will help with the negotiations and things like that. And also knowing the market. Hey, I understand there's going to be a development here. How is that going to affect the property value? So we've got to do a good job of knowing the market, getting a good idea of the picture, and knowing where it's at. Still, even at this point in time, hey, it has potential to grow and things like that. So yeah, I mean, the main thing is just having good relationships at the end of the day will certainly help you in the real estate market. Knowing other agents, and also if you've worked with them before, typically, and they know if you've been easy to work with in the past, you'll be easy to work with in the future. So typically that's also a good thing as well.
Yeah, absolutely. With a good relationship and also I would say like a good reputation, right, within the industry, that definitely helps when it comes to negotiations. So people aren't putting walls up immediately or
Mhm.
making assumptions about how you're going to go into the negotiations, right, and seeing you in a negative light. So it's
Right.
very important. But yeah, Tony, man, appreciate you sharing all of these tips with us today. I think it's very valuable for anybody who is in the market, getting ready to negotiate, getting ready to go out there, get their hands on the property that they want, or also selling a property as well and making sure they're getting a good deal. But guys, if you guys are looking for a great real estate professional to work with, make sure to reach out to Tony directly. His information is in the description down below, so make sure to reach out to him, and he'll be able to consult you on how you should approach your next negotiation in your real estate transaction as well. But other than that, appreciate you guys tuning into the Real Estate Roundup. Make sure to tune in again next week, and we'll see you in the next episode. Take care.
Take care.